The iron wheels of the stagecoach screeched as they rolled to a stop, stirring up clouds of dust that clung to Clara Bennett's travelling dress. She clutched her satchel a little tighter, heart pounding with equal parts hope and dread. The long journey west had been filled with rattling roads, unfamiliar faces, and the quiet echo of her own doubts. Yet, she told herself again and again, this was her chance for a new beginning, a chance to leave behind the loneliness that had shadowed her since her parents' passing. Mail-order brides weren't spoken of kindly back east, but Clara knew in her heart that sometimes destiny needed a little nudge. She had answered a gentleman's advertisement, exchanged letters of careful courtesy, and agreed to travel all this way to meet her intended groom at his ranch. His name was Thomas Whitaker, a man of sturdy faith and modest fortune, who had promised a life of stability, hard work, and perhaps in time, love. Clara smoothed the wrinkles in her skirt and stepped down from the coach, blinking against the brightness of the afternoon sun. The air smelled different here, dry, wild, laced with sage and dust. In the distance, she saw endless stretches of golden pasture, broken only by wooden fences and the silhouettes of grazing cattle. A ranch hand tipped his hat at her politely, but did not speak. Her heart fluttered nervously. "Where is Thomas?" she wondered, scanning the small gathering of people waiting for the coach. She expected a man holding a sign, or at least looking around with anticipation. Instead, her eyes fell on a tall, broad-shouldered figure leaning against a fence post, his hat pulled low over his brow. He was not smiling. Clara hesitated, then approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "Would you happen to be Mr. Whitaker?" The man lifted his gaze, and Clara was struck by the steel-grey eyes staring back at her. They were handsome, yes, but they carried a weight, a sorrow that made her breath catch. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke, his voice deep and steady. "No, ma'am," he said. "Name's Ethan Dawson. This here's my ranch." Clara blinked in confusion, clutching her satchel tighter. "Oh, forgive me. I must have mistaken the stop. I was supposed to meet Mr. Thomas Whitaker. His ranch was—" She fumbled through her papers, cheeks flushing. Ethan Dawson's brow furrowed as he watched her. "Whitaker?" he muttered. "His land's near the other ridge. You're about half a day's ride off." The realization hit Clara like a stone. Half a day's ride? She had come all this way, and yet she had stepped off at the wrong ranch. Her heart sank, but before she could apologize further, a small voice pierced the air. "Papa?" Clara turned, and there she was, a little girl, no older than 6, with curls the color of summer wheat and eyes as blue as a clear sky. She clutched a worn rag doll to her chest, peeking shyly from behind her father's leg. "Annie," Ethan said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. But Annie wasn't looking at her father. She was staring up at Clara with a gaze so pure, so unwavering, that Clara felt something stir inside her chest. The child stepped forward, her small hand brushing against Clara's skirt. "You came," Annie whispered, her voice trembling with wonder. "God finally sent you to us." The words hung in the air like a prayer answered. Clara froze, her lips parting, unsure how to respond. Ethan's eyes darkened, and he immediately bent down to his daughter's level. "Annie," he said firmly, though his voice cracked ever so slightly. "That's enough." But Annie only hugged her doll tighter, her eyes still locked on Clara, as if she had been waiting for her all along. Clara's heart raced. She wanted to explain, to tell them this was all a mistake, that she wasn't meant for this ranch, that she belonged somewhere else. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she offered Annie a soft smile. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," Clara said gently. I wasn't sent here. I was meant for another ranch, but—" Her voice faltered as she looked into the little girl's eyes. "But why does it feel like I was meant to be here?" Ethan straightened, his jaw tight. "Best I get you a horse and rider to take you to Whitaker's place. You've had a long journey." Clara nodded quickly, though inside her stomach churned. She wasn't ready to leave, though she didn't understand why. The storm that had kept Clara at the Dawson Ranch stretched into the night, Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled through the canyons like a restless spirit. Clara had been given a small room upstairs, humble yet warm, with a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. Though she had intended to leave that afternoon, Ethan had insisted no woman would be riding through such weather. And so she stayed, though part of her wondered if the heavens themselves were delaying her departure on purpose. Clara lay awake, listening to the storm and the occasional creak of the ranch house. Every so often she thought of little Annie's words echoing in her heart. God finally sent you to us. Why had the child spoken so? Why had she looked at her with such certainty, such trust, as though she had been praying for Clara herself? The thought tugged at Clara's heartstrings until sleep finally claimed her. Morning came with silence. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and glistening. Clara rose early, smoothed her dress, and made her way down to the kitchen, where the smell of coffee and fresh cornbread filled the air. Ethan was already there, pouring a cup of coffee, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the hard muscles of a man shaped by years of toil. He looked up as Clara entered, his grey eyes still guarded. "Morning," he said simply. "Good morning," Clara replied, her voice soft. Annie was seated at the table, her doll propped beside her, and when she saw Clara, her face lit up like the sunrise. "You stayed," she exclaimed, scrambling out of her chair and running to hug Clara's skirts. Clara laughed gently, resting a hand on the girl's hair. "Only because the storm didn't allow me to leave," she explained. But Annie only smiled knowingly, as if storms were but the hand of God moving pieces into place. Ethan cleared his throat. "I'll have one of the ranch hands saddle a horse after breakfast. You'll be on your way to Whitaker's by noon." Clara nodded, though a faint pang tightened her chest at the thought. She seated herself at the table, allowing Annie to chatter beside her about her doll, her favorite pony, and the wildflowers that grew near the stream. It had been so long since Clara had felt such innocent company. Annie's laughter filled the quiet corners of the Dawson home, chasing away a silence that Clara realized had probably lingered here far too long. As breakfast ended, Ethan excused himself to oversee the ranch hands, leaving Clara alone with Annie. The little girl tugged at her hand. "Will you come outside with me?" she asked. Clara hesitated, glancing toward the door. She should be preparing to leave, but something in Annie's pleading eyes made her relent. "Just for a little while," she said with a smile. They stepped outside into the crisp air. The ranch spread before them, wide and endless, framed by the distant mountains. Annie led Clara toward the corral where a few horses grazed lazily. She pointed to a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. "That's Daisy," Annie said proudly. "Mama used to ride her." The words caught Clara off guard. She glanced at Annie gently. "Your mama?" Annie nodded, her small fingers tightening on Clara's hand. "She's in heaven now. Papa doesn't talk about it much. But I prayed and prayed for God to send us someone who would smile again. And then you came." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knelt down, taking Annie's small hands in hers. "Oh, Annie, I don't think I was meant." She stopped herself, unable to finish the sentence, because deep down something about Annie's faith stirred her own doubts. Before Clara could say more, Ethan's voice called from across the yard. "Annie, best get inside." Weather's still slick. "Don't want you catching a chill." Annie pouted but obeyed, skipping back toward the house. Clara rose slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. Ethan met her halfway, his expression unreadable. "She gets attached too easily," he said gruffly. "Don't put notions in her head." Clara stiffened. "I didn't. She only wanted company." His gaze lingered on her, as if weighing unspoken thoughts. Finally he exhaled. "I'll see that you're on the road soon. Best for everyone." But as Clara turned toward the house, her heart ached. Why did leaving suddenly feel like loss?